The young woman stood before the earnest pleas of everyone, begging her to step in and save them. A man fell to his knees, using his father's dying wish to pressure her, insisting that if she just nodded, everything would be resolved peacefully. The woman next to him also screamed bitterly, claiming that her sacrifice was the obvious price for everyone to live, while scolding her for making her own father kneel and beg. Faced with those meaningless complaints, she felt extremely exhausted and disgusted, because the surrounding space was far too noisy. The other woman began to fake crying, acting heartbroken at having to sacrifice her daughter, yet not forgetting to remind her that this was an opportunity to show true filial piety. She gave a sarcastic sneer, exposing the brazenness of this family as they had once heartlessly thrown her away and abandoned her in a cold room for so long. Even though she was struck with a stinging slap, she didn't flinch, having grown too accustomed to their abusive antics. She looked at them with a sharp, cold gaze and told them to rest assured. She promised to let them live because she was the only person in this world capable of stopping the apocalypse. In reality, her soul had lived through a total of 99 different past lives. With every reincarnation, the mysterious power within her grew stronger, but her life was always treated as a cheap sacrifice to save the world, leaving her with no attachment to her own life whatsoever. She deeply despised having to watch those brazen people constantly demand her sacrifice as if it were a given. That entire family cheered in joy, thanking her profusely and dreaming about how the family would rise in power thanks to her merits. She coldly demanded that they stop putting on a show of loving each other, and declared that there was no need to thank her since they had already kneeled and bowed to her. The scepter in her hand suddenly emitted a blinding light. She told herself she had to give them a fitting reward for taking the time to stage such an expensive play. She wished them luck with their pathetic lives and asserted that from now on, they would never be able to hold their heads high in public again. The man looked bewildered, completely failing to understand the meaning behind her words. Right at that moment, a piece of paper flew in front of him. It was an article exposing how the parents abused the hero and deceived the entire royal family, complete with vivid moving images that terrified him to his core. A servant ran in frantically, announcing that an extremely serious problem had just occurred. Royal guards had stormed into the mansion to verify whether the abuse allegations in the article were true. The man angrily shouted, ordering her to come down and cursing her as a traitor for daring to humiliate the family's honor. Despite his ungrateful cursing, she calmly walked away, thinking to herself that her family in her very first life was still much nobler than these people. She recalled her first life, where her parents viewed starting a family merely as a task to check off their life's to-do list, causing her and her older brother to be raised in complete indifference. Although she was never loved by her family, she always loved everyone, and was fortunate enough to have good friends who truly understood her soul. Those friends understood her clumsy ways of expressing affection, and were always the first to take the initiative to reach out. Then disaster struck. A scream calling her name echoed amidst the shock of her friends. A horrific car crash had occurred right on the street. Seeing the pool of blood, she felt a sense of relief knowing that her friends were safe. Her first life ended at the age of 19, right before she could enjoy her vacation after the university entrance exams, but at least back then, she still had the right to choose. From then on, in every life, she was reincarnated into worlds on the brink of an apocalypse and pushed to her death as the sole savior of humanity. She wondered if this was the price she had to pay for sacrificing herself to save her friends in her first life, seeing as people always forced her to die in their place in every subsequent life. However, that cruel cycle dragged on endlessly until her 99th reincarnation. Her endurance had reached its absolute limit. She had nothing left to cherish in life, but witnessing the world fall into chaos after missing the chance to stop the disaster caused her even more pain. The surrounding citizens began to whisper among themselves with anxious faces when they saw her. Their eyes seemed to silently blame her for all their misfortunes. They blamed her for having power in her hands yet being too heartless to save them. Even though her soul was hardened, she never wanted to see such heartbreaking scenes ever again. She believed that those innocent children truly deserved a chance to keep living. She realized that in this life, she wouldn't be able to live past the age of 20 either. This year she was 17, living a bit longer than usual, but she desperately prayed that this would be her final lifetime. She didn't hope for any changes. She just repeated her small wish as usual and calmly accepted her 99th death. A magnificent, radiant castle appeared beneath the clear blue sky. A A strange noise made someone jolt in surprise. The servants in the palace were stunned, unable to believe their eyes when they saw the appearance of a stranger. She had reincarnated as a baby girl once again, feeling utter exhaustion as she entered her 100th life, an obsessive number in the hundreds. She told herself she had to try and get used to this new life even though her infant vision was still blurry, wondering which noble family she had fallen into this time. She reminded herself to always stay alert because her powers wouldn't be usable until she turned 1, while the servants kept fawning over how adorable she was. Right at that moment, a noble man addressed as the Duke walked straight into the room. Hearing people congratulate the Duke on having a beautiful daughter, she was shocked to realize he was her father in this life. The moment she saw her father's face, she felt a bad omen and had a premonition that this life would also turn into a disaster. She wondered anxiously what she would have to endure this time, being abandoned, abused, or perhaps being the child of an unlucky prophecy again. She even feared she would be killed right after being born. She was afraid of falling back into a state of helplessness, unable to do anything but watch the world come to an end. A feeling of despair engulfed her as she thought about the future. She was terrified by the prospect of her soul being chained to this world, forced to witness every collapse until humanity's last breath. She just wanted to live to bear all the pain for others, but then suddenly she was startled and stunned. Her father suddenly smiled incredibly gently and thanked his youngest daughter for being born. This abrupt change in attitude left her confused, unable to understand what was happening. The baby peeked at the woman holding her in her arms. Her mother affectionately praised her as a pretty baby girl, making her wonder why everyone looked so happy. She maintained a skeptical attitude, assuming that this kindness could change at any moment, even if they praised her for looking just like her mother. However, deep down, she still wished this were true and that this 100th life would pass peacefully. Her parents decided to name her Anastasia, a name they thought was very beautiful. But that was the exact name of the hero who had once saved this world. The newborn baby was dead silent, completely shocked upon hearing that name. She realized with horror that whenever she was named after a hero, she was guaranteed to have the most miserable life possible. She was sick of it, knowing for sure they would hail her as a hero and ultimately offer her up as a scapegoat. She blamed herself for being so foolish to expect anything different in this life, certain that things would be much worse. So frustrated she couldn't speak, she could only scream silently in her heart. Behind the door, another little girl was secretly observing the room. It turned out to be her older sister in this life. Time flew by, and a month had passed since she was officially born. Strangely, not a single unlucky or terrible thing had happened to her yet. She had already braced herself for the worst after being given that heroic name. But she told herself it was still too early to let her guard down. Because things similar to this had already happened in one of her past lives. Back then, people also called her a child blessed by the gods, gave her a hero's name, and pretended to treat her well. However, the ending of that charade was extremely tragic. They began to fear her power and turned to abusing her without mercy. Just like that, her parents at the time wanted to eliminate any possibility of her using magic against them. Since her parents in this life also gave her a hero's name, she was certain they would eventually force her to sacrifice herself. With no other choice, she was forced to always be ready to deal with any situation. Currently, the only thing she could do was try to carefully observe and grasp her surroundings. The beautiful woman with black hair and red eyes was her mother in this life. Whenever she was comforted by her mother, she would fall asleep immediately. This made her feel exposed and vulnerable to harm. Meanwhile, the tall man with pink hair that barely matched his fierce appearance was her father. He cooed at her in a weird voice, asking if she had forgotten his face, leading her to suspect this was some kind of psychological attack. In addition, she noticed something quite unusual. There were always servants on standby next to her crib, never leaving her side for a second. She shivered, thinking they were true monsters for keeping such a strict watch over a newborn baby. Hearing vaguely that this was the Duke's estate, she sighed, knowing the nobility was never easy to deal with. Suddenly, from outside the door came a very loud and chaotic noise. Her father rushed in, frantically asking if something was wrong with his youngest child. Seeing him look angry, she panicked, thinking that her end had finally come. As it turned out, he was furious simply because he wondered why his healthy daughter was never seen crying or smiling. The baby was dumbfounded to realize that all the commotion just now was simply because she was too well behaved and never fussed. The father was blowing up at the doctor, calling him incompetent and useless, declaring he had no choice but to mete out punishment. He drew his sword with murderous intent, threatening to chop off the useless doctor's head on the spot, making the atmosphere incredibly tense. Baby Anastasia witnessed the scene in horror, wondering if her father was actually going to kill someone just because she refused to cry, or if this was just a new psychological torture tactic. The real reason she didn't dare to cry was that in her past lives, her parents had tried to kill her simply because they couldn't stand the noise she made. The little girl decided not to care about other people's business and to find every way to protect her own life. The doctor was so terrified that he was willing to bet his life to guarantee that Lady Anastasia was indeed very healthy. He cried miserably, begging the Duke to trust his assessment. Seeing that scene, Anastasia started to feel a twinge of guilt and realized she had no choice but to do something. So she gathered her strength and let out a loud cry, leaving everyone in the room stunned and amazed. The father jumped, turning to look at his youngest daughter with a completely surprised expression. His face suddenly lit up and beamed upon hearing his child's cry. He picked her up, praising his daughter endlessly for having such a loud and beautiful voice. Anastasia was speechless, unable to believe her father was so overjoyed, because in the past, her crying had only ever brought terrible things. She was entirely baffled, not understanding how this man could look so happy. Even though she told herself to remain on guard, the tears just kept flowing endlessly as she lay snug in her father's warm embrace. Right at that moment, the sound of tiny footsteps could be heard rushing toward the room. A little girl with pink hair appeared, her face full of resentment and reproach. That little girl was Laurentia. The moment she entered, she loudly asked her father how he could treat her like that. Clinging tightly to her stuffed bear Lala, Laurentia angrily accused her father of heartlessly abandoning both her and her beloved toy. She glared at her father with an expression that showed no intention of yielding. Anastasia recognized this as her older sister in this 100th life. Although she knew she had siblings, this was the first time she had met her, bringing her more anxiety than joy. Anastasia was worried that because she possessed powers, she would monopolize all the attention. This could easily lead to jealousy within the family. She imagined herself being hated and harmed by her siblings, just like what had happened in her past lives. Laurentia stepped closer to observe and commented that while her little sister had adorably chubby cheeks, she was worried it would be annoying if Anastasia got cranky and started crying. The older sister continued to stare at her little sister with a probing look. Anastasia trembled in fear, not knowing what her sister planned to do to her next. Surprisingly, Laurentia suddenly cheered with excitement upon realizing her little sister was incredibly pretty. Anastasia was completely frozen by her sister's unexpectedly positive reaction. Laurentia lunged forward to hug both her father and sister, joyfully declaring that from now on, her stuffed bear Lala had a little sister. The older sister was even eager to give up her favorite pudding for her sister Sasha. Laurentia explained that her name was Lala, and Anastasia would be Sasha, so they would look like a matching pair, ignoring the little sister's frown. Anastasia struggled fiercely in her father's arms to protest the pudding gift she didn't want at all. Seeing her sister squirm, Laurentia became even more convinced that her sister really liked the new name. The father gently explained to his eldest daughter that Anastasia was still too young to eat pudding. He patted Laurentia's head and suggested that perhaps her little sister just wanted to watch her eat it. Laurentia worried, thinking that if she ate it alone, it would be hard on Sasha. She remembered how sad she felt when she was sick and could only eat soup while not being allowed to have ice cream, so she didn't want her sister to feel the same way. Anastasia was incredibly surprised to realize her sister was genuinely caring about her feelings. Laurentia brought the pudding right up to her sister's mouth, intending to let her try a bite. This scared Anastasia pale, knowing that eating it with her infant body would surely put her life in danger. She gulped in terror with the food right in front of her face. In a panic, Anastasia was truly terrified. She looked to her father with a desperate, pleading gaze. Ironically, her father misunderstood his daughter's intent and affectionately assumed she wanted him to give her a big kiss. After that, he even spoke on his younger daughter's behalf, confirming to Laurentia that Anastasia truly wanted to watch her sister enjoy the pudding. Laurentia began eating the pudding happily, though she still felt a bit guilty toward her sister. To make up for it, she decided to lend her sister her most beloved stuffed bear, Lala. The father asked in surprise, knowing full well that Laurentia couldn't sleep without that bear. The little girl bravely stated that as the older sister, she definitely had to be yielding and take care of her sister Sasha. Anastasia looked at her sister with eyes full of emotion, stunned by this affection. However, she quickly composed herself and reminded herself not to let her guard down in the face of unexpected kindness. Laurentia worriedly asked if her sister had that expression because she didn't like the bear. Anastasia secretly wished her sister would just hate her like the people in her past lives, feeling it would make her life much easier. Laurentia's vigilance was truly beautiful. Both her father and sister gathered around to comfort her, promising to buy her anything from rabbits to tigers, as long as she stopped crying. Anastasia felt something was wrong and couldn't understand why this family didn't hate her at all. Laurentia suddenly covered her face with her hands, preparing for a joke. The older sister made a funny face and shouted "peekaboo" to tease her little sister. Caught off guard, Anastasia accidentally let out a laugh at her sister's silly yet adorable action. The entire room erupted in joy seeing the little girl smile. Meanwhile, Anastasia felt her life was over for accidentally showing her emotions. Rumors about Lady Anastasia smiling while playing peekaboo with her sister quickly spread throughout the mansion. From then on, whenever the maids had free time, they would gather around and make all sorts of funny faces, hoping to catch a glimpse of the baby's smile. Even the family doctor tried his best to make the young lady laugh by making the weird faces he used to use on his own daughter. The father was not left out either, enthusiastically joining in the effort to coax his youngest daughter. Finally, the mother had to step in and kick everyone out, demanding they leave the mother and daughter to rest in peace. Anastasia felt incredibly strange because in her past lives, her silence usually just drove adults crazy or made them leave in anger. Outside the door, everyone still hadn't given up, continuing to animatedly discuss how to make the baby laugh one more time. Anastasia simply couldn't fathom the bizarre behavior of the people around her. That afternoon, while she was lying in her crib, another guest appeared. A young boy approached the bed and asked if Anastasia had woken up yet. It was Damien, Anastasia's older brother, who was 5 years older than her. Despite his young age, Damien was educated very strictly to become the future heir of the ducal family. Anastasia wondered why someone as busy as her older brother was here and reminded herself to be particularly wary of this character. When asked what she was thinking about with such a serious face, the little girl secretly replied that she was focusing on how to not lose her life. She began to harbor deep suspicions about why everyone in this house treated her with such unusual kindness. Damien suddenly pulled out a stuffed tiger and showed it to his sister. He told her he had heard Laurentia say that their sister had a very funny expression when she smiled. Damien decided to give his precious stuffed tiger, which had been with him since childhood, to his sister, even though he knew he would feel very lonely without it. Anastasia realized this wasn't just an old toy, but a priceless keepsake for her brother. The boy patted her head, desperately wanting to see his sister smile with his own eyes just once. Anastasia was stunned that her brother was willing to give up his treasure just in exchange for her smile. Seeing the expectant looks of her brother and sister, Anastasia felt her heart begin to waver. The little girl decided not to let these children down and would try to return their affection. So Anastasia hugged the stuffed tiger and broke into a bright, cheerful smile. Damien was overjoyed to see his sister smile. Meanwhile, Anastasia still secretly reminded herself to always maintain the necessary mental clarity. After so many disappointments in her past lives, the little girl began to harbor hope that perhaps a miracle could truly happen to her in this life. The soul that had lived through 100 human lives thought to itself that if this family didn't turn their backs on her, then this life would be very much worth living. Anastasia started being pampered by the maids, dressed in the most glamorous and expensive dresses. The little girl appeared like a tiny princess in an exquisitely crafted blue and white dress. The maids couldn't help themselves, exclaiming and praising Anastasia as looking just like a little snow fairy. The Duke generously declared he would buy all the designs and demanded the tailor be paid 4 times the original price, leaving Anastasia's eyes wide in shock. She was still struggling to adapt to the current situation and recalled that everything started from an incident that happened a week ago. That was about 5 months after she was officially born. Finally, Anastasia was able to move around more and began finding ways to climb out of her cramped crib. Although they were really just clumsy and difficult crawling movements, the little girl was able to move a short distance. Anastasia was practicing babbling her first sounds and realized she could make much clearer noises than before. Seeing his daughter babbling, her father got so excited his eyes lit up and he asked if she was trying to say she loved him. The little girl sighed in exasperation at her father's delusions, thinking to herself that it would be a long time before she could actually communicate with others. Looking in the mirror, Anastasia saw she looked no different from any normal infant. Instead of having to run for her life like in her past lives, she was now just using all her might to practice belly crawling. Life was so strangely peaceful that it made her a bit uneasy. Right at that moment, she performed the first rollover of her life. Suddenly, the little girl felt numerous pairs of eyes locked onto her. It turned out the entire family, from her parents to her siblings, were holding their breath, watching her every tiny movement with expectant faces. Laurentia screamed with excitement seeing her sister roll over successfully, while her father was so moved he broke into tears. Damien marveled, praising his sister for being more agile than other babies, and the mother was convinced her child was a genius, so the whole family decided to throw a celebration party. Anastasia was completely stunned to find herself seated prominently on a high chair at a lavish banquet. She thought this was just going to be a cozy family gathering like everyone had said. But in reality, the scale of the party was unimaginably grand, leaving her in shock. Damien eagerly gave his sister a gift, while the father cried tears of joy because his child was growing up healthy. Anastasia sat on the chair with a bewildered expression, completely unable to understand what was happening around her. The maids also gathered around, praising the young lady's rollover as extremely impressive. They expressed their pride in serving someone as talented as her. Anastasia noticed that whenever there was a party like this, the servants all received handsome bonuses. The little girl wondered what was so huge about a baby rolling over that they had to make such a big fuss. Deep down, she felt this family and this place were truly a bit weird. The passionate love from everyone warmed her heart, but also left her anxious about future incidents. The whole family watched the brilliant fireworks in the night sky to celebrate the little girl's memorable milestone. Anastasia gazed intently at her beautiful mother under the light of the fireworks. Her mother gently confessed that she didn't need anything, only hoping her daughter would grow up healthy and strong. The little girl was deeply moved to know she didn't have to be a good or successful child, but just living well was enough. The feeling that everything was so simple made Anastasia feel relieved, and she clung tightly to her mother. Waking up the next morning, the little girl was still reeling from the grandeur of yesterday. However, the room today was unusually quiet. The servants had all gone on their year-end holiday, reluctantly bidding the little girl farewell. Since everyone was away, there was only one maid left assigned to take care of her. Due to the busy holiday season, her parents had also left the mansion early in the morning. Her older brother Damien was busy with his important lessons. Meanwhile, her sister Laurentia was bedridden with the flu. Anastasia made an effort to crawl near the chair, wanting to touch the back of it. Although the family didn't want her to grow up too fast, the little girl longed to walk soon. Her tiny body trembled from exerting too much effort during her practice. Right at that moment, a strange figure suddenly appeared from behind. A maid with an unfamiliar face approached and asked if the little girl was playing by herself. Anastasia was on guard, realizing she had never seen this woman before. The woman lied, claiming the madam had sent her to take the little girl to see her mother. The baby immediately grew suspicious, knowing full well her mother was away, and she would never wake up her personal servants in this manner. Anastasia was certain this was a shady plot, and the woman was underestimating her sharp instincts. Determined not to let her succeed, the little girl started struggling and crying loudly. Immediately, the woman revealed her true colors and clamped her hand tightly over the baby's mouth. She looked at the little girl with a sharp, cold gaze and threatened to take good care of her. Anastasia trembled in anger, silently cursing the person trying to harm her. The little girl bitterly realized that life had been going too smoothly lately, so a disaster striking was perfectly understandable. In the dark of the night, a stranger in a black cloak was frantically running through the forest. Anastasia woke up, feeling incredibly uncomfortable from the violent shaking. She saw that her kidnapper was a strange man, not the maid from earlier. Fortunately, he hadn't run too far away from her family's estate. The little girl blamed herself for being too careless to fall into such an ironic situation. Anastasia realized she needed to observe her surroundings more carefully to find an escape route. She tried to calm down, silently feeling lucky that this was only a kidnapping and not a massacre. She feared the scenario of her family being murdered while she had to completely alone watch everything crumble once again. The feeling of having to helplessly watch a tragedy unfold caused her soul immense pain. Anastasia clenched her fists and swore not to let that happen, especially when this life had only just begun half a year ago. She debated whether to use her power to escape immediately or let herself be taken to find out who was behind this. Although using teleportation magic would be a bit troublesome, she was very curious about these people's true motives. She wondered if this was a plot aimed at the ducal family or if they already knew about her mysterious powers. Either way, the little girl believed finding out the truth was entirely worth it and began fantasizing about defeating them. However, she didn't have the heart to think about her parents falling into absolute despair in front of an empty crib. Not wanting her family to worry too much, Anastasia planned to send a reassuring message into their dreams. Suddenly, an arrow tore through the air, aimed straight at the kidnapper. The criminal was hit, crying out in pain, and tumbled to the ground along with the little girl. He panicked, not knowing what was happening, while the little girl silently ordered him to shut his mouth. Anastasia was surprised to hear the voice of a child ringing out nearby. Her eyes met a figure approaching through the bushes. A blond boy with a noble appearance emerged, loudly berating the kidnapper for being insolent. The boy looked at Anastasia with eyes full of concern. He declared he had a prior engagement with this young lady and asked who the other person was. The kidnapper was furious at being stopped by a kid and cursed the boy as a little brat. He shouted, demanding the boy get out of the way, while Anastasia felt this person looked very unfamiliar. The heavy footsteps of soldiers echoed. They announced they had found Lady Anastasia right up ahead. The kidnapper panicked, unable to understand how the ducal family's reinforcements could arrive so quickly. The blond boy ordered him to hand the little girl over immediately if he didn't want his limbs chopped off. The kidnapper tried to justify himself, claiming he had his own hidden difficulties for doing this. The boy sighed and threatened to cut him in half if he dared to utter such cheap excuses. Anastasia noticed this boy was around Damien's age, but his way of speaking was incredibly sharp and cold. The little girl highly evaluated his confidence when she saw his hand gripping his sword extremely steadily. Even more, the boy possessed a formidable and incredibly powerful source of magical energy. He swung his sword, sending the kidnapper flying before he could even react. Due to the strong impact, Anastasia slipped from his grasp and went into a freefall. The little girl mentally prepared to use a protection spell, knowing it would put an immense strain on her infant body. In the moment she neared the ground, she squeezed her eyes shut and gathered all her strength. Surprisingly, she felt none of the pain she had imagined. The blond boy had caught her just in time and tenderly asked if she was hurt anywhere. Seeing Anastasia not crying, he worriedly assumed the little girl was suffering from severe psychological shock. Anastasia babbled to let him know she was fine, but then she noticed another danger approaching. The kidnapper, despite being injured, intentionally exposed a weakness to lure the boy into letting his guard down. The little girl decided to act, and a brilliant red light flared from her eyes. A blinding blue energy blast hit the kidnapper squarely as he was about to attack from behind with a knife. He collapsed to the ground instantly, leaving the blond boy absolutely astonished, not understanding what had just happened. After using magic, Anastasia started coughing violently because her body was overloaded. The feeling like her chest was about to explode made the little girl remind herself to be more careful using her power while so young. The blond boy panicked, thinking the little girl was cold or so terrified that she was shivering like that. He hugged her tightly against his chest, gently patting her and telling her everything was okay now and it would be warm soon. Anastasia found this embrace incredibly warm and comforting, so she calmed down. People came running frantically. Everyone shouted in panic when they finally found the young lady. Anastasia panted heavily, feeling she had truly been drained of all her energy after the recent incident. Damien anxiously called his sister's name while the soldiers and everyone around were still reeling from the shock. The older brother trembled in fear, panting heavily as he desperately tried to wake Anastasia up. The kidnapper was subdued on the spot. He frantically begged for forgiveness and demanded to explain his actions. Anastasia remained completely still, her breathing so faint that anyone looking at her felt their heart break. With a cold glare, Damien ordered his subordinates to take the villain away, demanding a thorough investigation before his father returned. Anastasia's parents worriedly discussed that even though their daughter was still very young, after this incident, they needed to act quickly for the safety of their children. Waking up from a long sleep, Anastasia was groggy, not knowing how long she had been out. As soon as they saw their daughter open her eyes, both the father and mother showed obvious shock mixed with relief. The little girl looked at her parents with innocent eyes, as if asking what had happened. The father joyfully shouted the news that Anastasia was awake and immediately ordered someone to fetch the doctor right away. He regretfully blamed himself for obeying the king too much and abandoning his daughter, but Anastasia secretly thought her father did the right thing, because he was also a duke carrying heavy responsibilities. The little girl recalled the moment she fainted after trying to use her power, realizing that because her infant body wasn't fully prepared, she suffered a severe backlash. The father looked at his daughter with deep sympathy and offered her a sincere apology. The duke and his wife stood by the crib together, apologizing in unison for letting their child experience something so horrible. Anastasia was moved by her new family's kindness. She held her father's hand and silently promised not to let them suffer, while hoping she would grow up very quickly. The family's soldiers all knelt down in unison. The sound of their weapons clashing echoed loudly. All the soldiers solemnly swore absolute loyalty to protect the young lady with their lives. Faced with this grand spectacle, Anastasia was deeply shocked and wondered why there were so many people here. The father excitedly showed off that these would be the little girl's personal bodyguards, believing this would make everyone feel safer. It turned out the kidnapping was just a cowardly act by a couple working in the mansion who were drowning in debt. They had come up with the crazy idea of kidnapping the young lady during the holidays to demand ransom from the ducal family. Luckily, that plot was stopped in time thanks to the intervention of her brother's close friend. In the end, they had a few bones broken and were kicked out of the mansion, a punishment Anastasia's parents still considered too lenient. Although she agreed this was good for her siblings, Anastasia still felt that hiring 20 guards just to watch over a baby was excessive. The father tenderly explained to his daughter that all these men were now under her command. He even suggested Anastasia offer some words of encouragement to boost her subordinates' morale. Anastasia felt completely speechless, not understanding what her father expected from a 6-month-old baby, and wondering if those soldiers would truly be happy to hear a baby babble. Contrary to her thoughts, the soldiers cheered enthusiastically, desperately begging the young lady to grant them a few words. Seeing their passionate, expectant eyes, Anastasia realized she really couldn't refuse. The little girl had to let out a few baby noises in response, silently thanking them for their help. Just that was enough to move the guards to tears because of the young lady's adorableness. They chanted their vow to do their utmost to protect the little girl, leaving Anastasia feeling that getting used to this fanaticism was going to be difficult. A month quickly passed since that fateful kidnapping. Now, there were always at least 2 people standing guard right inside her room and 2 others outside her door. Anastasia noticed that as she grew, observing things became easier, and she hoped to gather more information after her first birthday. The little girl pondered the kidnapping and realized her family was truly in a very unsafe situation. On the day she was taken, her parents had been very anxious because they rarely both left the mansion at the same time like that. As a powerful ducal family, there were surely many factions targeting them. Otherwise, they wouldn't need so many guards for a baby who never left the house. Anastasia intended to try using magic one more time despite knowing her body would be under immense pressure, but she still tried to practice crawling while trembling. She quickly gave up on the idea, not wanting to make her parents worry one more time if she fell ill again. However, Anastasia didn't want to just sit and wait for death, since she was the one bearing the mission to stop the apocalypse. While she was engrossed in her practice, a familiar voice rang out, asking the little sister why she was in such a hurry. Damien appeared with a bright smile on his face and affectionately called his sister's name. Anastasia was surprised, not knowing when her brother had arrived. Damien immediately swooped down and enveloped his sister in a loving hug. The boy was amazed at Anastasia's crawling speed and praised her for growing up so fast, making the maids secretly think these weren't words a child should say to an infant. Seeing an unprecedented gentleness on her brother's face, Anastasia felt it was incredibly strange. Damien excitedly announced that the friend from last time really wanted to come see her, and asked if Anastasia still remembered that person. Anastasia immediately recalled the blonde boy who had saved her and babbled in agreement. Seeing his sister look interested, Damien asked if she would allow that friend to come visit her. Anastasia squealed with excitement because she was also very curious about the identity of the boy. She was intrigued by him, not just because of his formidable magical power, but also because of an oddly familiar feeling, even though they had never met before. With the experience of a soul that had reincarnated many times, Anastasia knew that sometimes she would run into acquaintances from other worlds. But with this boy, there was something more than just familiarity. It brought an indescribable sense of longing. She told herself this was a golden opportunity to find out more about his true background. Seeing his sister spacing out in thought, Damien felt secretly jealous, assuming Mikhail had completely stolen his little sister's heart, Mikhail had arrived at the mansion in a luxurious carriage. He was surprised because time had passed faster than he thought. After praising the coachman, Mikhail stepped out of the carriage with an air of composure. He was fully prepared for the meeting he had been anticipating for so long. Standing before the magnificent castle, Mikhail told himself it was time to go see the little young lady. He walked inside and affirmed to Damien that he had kept his promise. Damien reminded his friend to maintain proper etiquette when meeting his sister, and received a highly confident reply from Mikhail. Mikhail suddenly burst into the room and excitedly greeted everyone, thrilled to finally see Anastasia again. Anastasia was currently sitting prominently on her high chair, surrounded by the maids. She stared at the newly arrived guest with a highly scrutinizing look. Mikhail approached, bent down to look at Anastasia, and found it incredibly fascinating how tiny she was. The two children looked deep into each other's eyes, as if trying to understand each other's thoughts. Mikhail waved his hand in a friendly greeting, while Anastasia was still busy digging through her 2,000 years of memories to see if she had ever met him anywhere before. Damien rushed to intervene, reprimanding Mikhail for bothering his sister without even introducing himself first. The older brother asserted that his sister was not a doll to be played with, but Mikhail countered that Anastasia was still just a baby. Damien angrily fired back, stating that his sister was an elegant lady of the Enderblanc family, not an ordinary infant. Seeing Damien lose his temper, Mikhail chuckled in amusement, while Anastasia was surprised, having never seen her brother act so childishly. The little girl felt it was good that Damien was finally acting his age instead of always trying to seem mature. Mikhail finally turned serious and asked to introduce himself first. The boy executed a deep, elegant bow, perfectly fitting for a noble. Mikhail expressed his honor at meeting the youngest daughter of the ducal family once again. He introduced himself as Mikhail, the sole heir of the Grand Duke Leventus's family, and gently kissed her hand. This action left Anastasia completely shocked, freezing her in place. Damien shouted in jealousy because even he, her older brother, had never been allowed to kiss his sister's hand like that. Ever since that meeting, Mikhail frequently visited the mansion and spent most of his time there every month. Because his father was busy, Mikhail had been sent over to study alongside his closest friend, Damien. The boy's appearance became the most heated topic of conversation among the maids. They even talked about Mikhail more than they did about the family members. Just hearing the heavy thud of running footsteps in the hallway, everyone immediately knew that Mikhail was arriving. Mikhail pushed the door open and burst in to greet the little baby, but Anastasia felt confused, wondering why he kept following her around. The boy rushed over to ask Anastasia if she was having fun. The little girl noticed that Mikhail had arrived much earlier than usual today. Suddenly hit by cold water, Anastasia shivered from the abrupt chill. Mikhail hurriedly apologized and explained that he had to wash himself clean before seeing her, not wanting to show up looking messy. Anastasia secretly appreciated Mikhail's thoughtfulness and felt this boy was truly far too mature for a 6-year-old. Mikhail held out a sparkling gemstone in exchange for a smile from Anastasia, leaving the little girl feeling utterly exhausted. It all started a few days ago, when Mikhail curiously asked the maids why the young lady never smiled at him. The maids explained that Anastasia's smile was a treasure not everyone could see, and only those exceptionally close to her had the chance to catch a fleeting glimpse of it. Mikhail showed great interest upon hearing those enticing challenges. And so, from that day on, the boy started bringing all sorts of extravagant gifts that he thought would please the little young lady. Damien and Laurentia were not to be outdone, bragging that their sister only smiled at them and her doll Lala. Provoked by the words of the two siblings, Mikhail feigned anger and firmly refused to accept defeat. He frantically brought over everything from delicate lace embroidery to the most expensive jewelry. Anastasia could only sigh in exasperation at the pile of brilliant rubies, wondering to herself if anyone in this world would actually give such gifts to an infant. Mikhail appeared surprised to see a baby sigh. Anastasia thought to herself that her recent slow growth must be because of him, even though she knew it was an unreasonable excuse since even Mikhail didn't know how to use magic. The blonde boy thought it would be adorable if the little girl grabbed the gemstone, but Anastasia knew it was just an adult's imposing thought. Anastasia felt anxious because she wasn't making any progress in learning to walk or talk, even though her family hadn't pressured her at all. The little girl wondered if she was doing everything too slowly, considering this was the 100th time she had been a child. Right at that moment, something bright red brushed past her, making the little girl wonder. In a moment of carelessness, Anastasia suddenly tripped. Both the maid and Mikhail rushed forward in a panic, trying to catch the little young lady. A thud rang out as the little girl tumbled to the ground. Fortunately, Mikhail was quick enough to catch Anastasia before she suffered a serious injury. The maid frantically asked if the young lady was okay, while Anastasia was still reeling from the sudden loss of balance. Mikhail awkwardly apologized, explaining he only meant to give her the gemstone and didn't expect it to cause her to fall like that. It turned out the main culprit was the ruby lying on the floor. Anastasia had felt heavy the moment she stood up. It turned out Mikhail had secretly slipped the gemstone into the hood of her cape. The little girl felt incredibly angry and trembled at being humiliated by a brat. Unable to hold back, Anastasia exploded and screamed that she absolutely hated him. The little girl's screams echoed throughout the magnificent castle. The maids could only stand frozen, looking at each other, while Mikhail's face darkened in shock. The blonde boy, trembling, asked if Anastasia truly hated him. The little girl ignored him and told him to go away, causing Mikhail to retreat sadly, explaining that he just thought she would look cute holding the stone. Everyone was amazed to see Mikhail understand baby talk so perfectly. He even coaxed Anastasia to not say such harsh words anymore. This only infuriated Anastasia further because Mikhail could translate babbles that not even her own family could comprehend. Laurentia and Damien were downcast, feeling that as her older siblings, they understood their sister less than an outsider. Despite knowing Mikhail had saved her life and was very kind to her, Anastasia was determined not to let her family down any further. Mikhail approached and offered to help her learn to walk, but after being outright rejected, he continued to marvel at the young lady's communication skills. The boy bragged that he had known how to walk before he was even 2 years old, from the age of 26 months, giving Anastasia a fright. The little girl felt heavy pressure, considering she was already 7 months old and still couldn't stand firmly. Mikhail came closer and teasingly asked if she really didn't need help, which started to make Anastasia curious. For the first time having such a normal childhood, the little girl also wanted to quickly escape the situation of having to roll and crawl around all day. Despite desperately wanting to stand up, Anastasia still acted aloof because she didn't want to accept help from this cheeky kid. Mikhail excitedly promised to be an incredibly dedicated teacher for her. He flashed a bright, friendly smile. Anastasia felt there was something off about that smile and suspected he was plotting something. The little girl wondered if Mikhail was intentionally copying her brother Damien's smile. Anastasia told herself she was agreeing not because he looked like her brother. Finally, the little girl reached out her hand because she yearned to grow up quickly. The maids behind couldn't help but be surprised to see the two children holding hands. Mikhail flashed a smug smile again, looking as if he had achieved his goal. That expression on his face stunned Anastasia, as she had never seen it before. The little girl gasped in panic at Mikhail's sudden proactiveness. Anastasia clapped her hands, signaling him to hurry up and teach her to walk instead of just standing there smiling. Mikhail agreed to help her stand up and practice her first steps. The boy gently lifted Anastasia off the ground. Everyone around couldn't believe their eyes when they saw the little young lady standing firmly on her own 2 feet. Anastasia also didn't expect that she would be able to stand up so easily with Mikhail's help. Mikhail triumphantly repeated his earlier promise, while the little girl wondered what his secret was. The boy encouraged Anastasia to try taking a step, even though she still felt a bit nervous. A tiny foot gently touched the floor. Anastasia burst into joy upon realizing she was actually walking. The feeling of finally doing what she wanted made the little girl's face light up. Just then, Damien appeared and dropped the book he was holding out of pure shock. The older brother stood frozen, speechless at the sight before him. Anastasia worriedly wondered when her brother had finished his lessons and how he had ended up here. Mikhail gloated to Damien that he had helped his sister walk very well. Anastasia struggled to be let go because Mikhail kept holding her tight. He was worried she might fall again. Mikhail casually strode off, taking the little girl somewhere else, making the situation tense. Damien immediately lunged forward and forcefully yanked his sister back. The older brother rapidly asked if Anastasia had fallen. The maids quickly explained that the little girl was fine. Mikhail took all the blame and explained he was just trying to give the little girl a gift. Damien furiously yelled, asking if Mikhail was the very reason his sister had almost gotten hurt. When Mikhail said he managed to catch her head in time, Damien grew even more furious, imagining his sister nearly smashing her head on the floor. The older brother hugged Anastasia tightly, as if wanting to protect her from all danger. With a cold gaze, Damien declared that Mikhail Leventis was banned from ever visiting his sister again. Mikhail tried to explain he didn't do it on purpose, but Damien shouted for him to get out immediately. The blonde boy stood frozen in hesitation at his friend's harsh reaction. Damien turned his back and walked away, leaving Mikhail standing alone in the room. Anastasia realized this was no longer a childish squabble, but had become a truly serious battle. Mikhail sadly told himself that having a little sister must be a wonderful thing. Damien shivered slightly upon hearing those words from behind. The distance between the two boys grew wider in a terrifying silence. Anastasia thought to herself that if both of them acted like normal children, things would have been much easier to resolve. Both of them were too mature for their age, even more knowledgeable than many immature adults. The little girl feared that if she didn't do something, the relationship between them would be permanently fractured. Damien was fundamentally an incredibly exemplary older brother who loved his siblings deeply. He usually spent time after school reading books to his two little sisters. They would often take naps together and wake up for a snack when Laurentia felt hungry. That was the time of day Damien loved and cherished the most. However, ever since Mikhail saved Anastasia, Damien had accepted sacrificing that precious time to give it to his friend. As for Mikhail, the boy also had quite a unique background. He had no relatives except for his grandfather. Seeing an infant for the first time, Mikhail was both amazed and awkward, not knowing how to treat her properly. In reality, Mikhail was just a 6-year-old kid who only knew how to keep company with a sword. His pranks were completely devoid of malice. It was just that he wasn't tactful enough yet. Anastasia felt she was the one who had to take responsibility for this mess. Everything started when she accidentally scolded him, causing Mikhail to lose face. Her biggest mistake was calling Mikhail's name before calling anyone else in her family. That made everyone feel incredibly slighted, forcing Anastasia to spend an entire day after that calling everyone's name one by one just to coax them. Furthermore, the fact that Mikhail was the first to witness his sister's first steps surely broke Damien's heart. It was out of guilt that Anastasia decided to carry out her plan. A plan she absolutely didn't want to do. The little girl took a deep breath and began crying loudly to shatter the gloomy atmosphere. The maids and the two boys panicked, running over to gather around the crib. Mikhail and Damien looked at each other in confusion, while Anastasia continued to cry pitifully. Mikhail started translating, saying the little girl was scared and didn't like the current situation at all. Damien froze upon understanding his sister's feelings through his friend's words. Both boys apologized to Anastasia, but she secretly thought they were the ones who needed to apologize to each other instead. Anastasia gripped Damien tightly, then pointed a finger toward Mikhail to signal. A silence enveloped everyone present in the room. Mikhail took the initiative to apologize for putting his friend's sister in danger, and Damien also confessed he had acted that way because he was too jealous. Mikhail also admitted he didn't know much about children because he naturally had no other siblings around. Mikhail scratched his head awkwardly and asked Damien what he should do to make amends. The blonde boy felt guilty about the words he had blurted out earlier, promising to follow every instruction Damien gave him, while asserting he had been very reserved by not touching Anastasia without permission. Hearing this, Anastasia finally understood why he had absolutely refused to carry her earlier. Mikhail earnestly asked Damien for help because he genuinely couldn't distinguish what was dangerous for small children. Damien silently looked at his little sister resting snugly in his arms. The older brother smiled, agreeing to help his best friend, and the two officially shook hands and made up. Mikhail excitedly asked again if they were truly no longer angry with each other, and if he could continue visiting Anastasia. Damien smiled and confirmed it was absolutely fine, making the atmosphere feel much lighter. Mikhail let out a sigh of relief, his face clearly showing his happiness. Someone silently marveled that the two boys standing next to each other looked as beautiful as a flawless painting. Anastasia started to feel exhausted, as it had been a very long time since she had cried so violently. Seeing the little baby looking sleepy, the two boys agreed it was time for her to take a nap and rest for a bit. In her sleep, Anastasia found herself lost in a strange space and was confused about whether this was a dream or not. The little girl told herself to wake up soon, but suddenly heard a faint cry for help echoing from afar. A glowing object chained tightly appeared out of thin air, and the pleas for her to step in and save it kept repeating. Anastasia looked blankly at the strange, sparkling entity right in front of her. Her mind grew hazy as she took each step closer to the illusory water surface. The little girl's body seemed to be controlled by an incredibly massive divine power. She realized she was the only one capable of understanding this mysterious entity. When she touched it, the entity curiously asked if she had already reincarnated up to 200 times. An intensely bright light suddenly erupted violently on the spot. The blinding flash forced the little girl to quickly cover her eyes with her hands to protect herself. Anastasia gasped in shock upon seeing the figure of someone who had just appeared. A small figure fully cloaked reminded her to never forget their presence. That figure asserted that they were the sole and most important existence to her. The reminder of the special bond between the two continued to echo in the dark space. Anastasia jolted backwards upon seeing a strange hand reaching out toward her. The entity sighed, saying that this was happening all over again, then gave the little girl a meaningful glance. Anastasia gradually passed out while still hearing the sound of someone calling her name very earnestly. The little girl woke up with a start, breathing heavily upon hearing the sound of someone calling baby ringing in her ear. Mikhail, along with Damien and her parents, were all gathered around the bed, looking at her with eyes full of worry. Anastasia was extremely confused as to why the whole family was gathered here like this. The mother gently stroked her hair and called Anastasia her adorable little baby girl. She choked up, recounting how everyone went crazy with worry when the little girl's fever lasted for a whole week without breaking. Anastasia was stunned, not expecting herself to have been bedridden for so long. Laurentia sobbed, demanding to take on the sickness for her sister, while Damien also asserted he would rather be the one suffering than to see his sister in pain. The father hugged his children tightly and declared that if anyone had to get sick, it should have been him. Mikhail stood silently observing the family reunion with a sad look on his face. Suddenly, a hand gently rubbed the blonde boy's head to encourage him. Mikhail was advised that he didn't need to be so modest about the contributions he had made. It turned out that over the past week, Mikhail had waded through the pouring rain to bring his family's treasure from the Grand Duke's mansion to save the little girl. The ducal family was deeply shocked when they heard the high priest's diagnosis that Anastasia was being surrounded by a mysterious curse. It was thanks to the heirloom Mikhail brought that the little young lady was finally able to wake up. The mother thanked Mikhail profusely, causing Anastasia to silently call the boy's name in her heart with gratitude. The little girl realized she owed Mikhail her life once again. Anastasia tossed and turned constantly, thinking about the curse everyone had mentioned. The little girl knew she was naturally immune to bewitching tricks, but this time the dream was too powerful, draining even the magical energy she had painstakingly stockpiled. Realizing that this 100th life wouldn't be easy at all, she blamed herself for being too immersed in the warmth of her family, forgetting her cruel destiny. Her absolute rule was still to save others at all costs. The little girl was determined to grow up fast to master her power and find out who was behind this incident to settle the score. The mother lovingly held baby Anastasia in her arms with the utmost care. The whole family prayed together for the little girl to grow up healthy and strong. Even though she was very moved by this affection, Anastasia told herself to just keep playing the role of the obedient little daughter for now. For a whole month after that, for the first time in 1,000 years, she slept every day within a magical protective circle. When she turned 9 months old, the little girl had grown a bit bigger, and using her power now only caused a mild fever. The father excitedly knelt down and called his darling daughter to come closer so he could hug her. Anastasia looked at her father with eyes full of curiosity and readiness. The little girl told herself she would definitely succeed in what she was planning to do. With the determination to walk on her own, the little girl carefully took her first wobbly steps on the ground. However, her tiny legs suddenly trembled, causing her to lose balance and almost tumble. Fortunately, her father caught her just in time and hugged her tightly to calm her down. He cheered joyfully because his beloved daughter had managed to walk 3 whole steps on her own. The father proudly showed off this achievement to everyone, while Anastasia thought to herself that if her father hadn't been there, she would have fallen hard. The guards were so moved they burst into tears upon witnessing this touching scene. Although she felt they were overreacting just because of 3 steps, the little girl had to admit this was a significant achievement. The older she grew, using magic to gather information became much more certain, easier, and simpler for her. Through the maids' conversations, Anastasia learned that everyone was busy preparing dresses for the April festival. The little girl also gathered information that Mikhail would return along with the Grand Duke around the middle of the month. Additionally, she learned more about noble titles and the long history of the Enderblanc family. Even though she used to worry about growing slowly, now she felt relieved as she was able to grasp all the important information. After seeing his daughter walk, the father immediately turned to check on the guards' training. Anastasia secretly judged that her father's management style with his subordinates was quite poor and strict. The soldiers asserted firmly that they were still trying their best to support the young lady's development. When pressed by her father about whether anyone had fallen behind during Mikhail's journey, the guards appeared extremely awkward and broke out in a sweat. The father decided this was the appropriate time to test the combat capabilities of the entire squad again. He announced he would organize a large-scale martial arts tournament right during the upcoming festival. Hearing this sent a chill down the guards' spines, leaving everyone sweating bullets in fear. Anastasia wondered if her father was just using her as an excuse to torture his subordinates. Her father lifted the little girl high and asserted that Anastasia would be the most shining centerpiece of the entire festival. The little girl was bewildered, not understanding why she had naturally become the main character like that. Laurentia came rushing in frantically from the door, calling her sister's name loudly. Joyful laughter and the footsteps of the maids echoed down the hallway. The older sister hugged her little sister and eagerly wanted to immediately share a surprise secret. The two sisters, Sasha and Lala, looked incredibly affectionate and adorable together. Laurentia bragged that both sisters would get to dress up as the most beautiful princesses in the upcoming festival. The mother discussed with the tailor about choosing yellow fabric and a bonnet for Anastasia because her hair was still too short. When asked about her own first dress, the mother recalled it was a white dress with yellow decorative patterns. Everyone clapped in agreement, thinking that yellow would beautifully highlight the young lady's charm. The maids spared no praise, saying that even though Anastasia was small, she already possessed an elegant aura exactly like her mother's. From her jet black hair to her brilliant ruby red eyes, she seemed to be cast from the exact same mold as her mother. The mother was incredibly happy to see her beloved daughter inherit all her beautiful features. She decided the dress for the upcoming martial arts tournament would also be a vibrant yellow. The tailor promised to prepare a dress as bright yellow as spring flowers so Anastasia would look as gorgeous as a little chick. Seeing there were still many beautiful fabrics left, the mother asked the tailor to use them to make plenty of other dresses for her youngest daughter. The tailor obeyed and promised to pour all his heart into creating the most beautiful outfits. The mother's face beamed with a happy smile, imagining her child all dressed up in new clothes. "We will need more people to prepare for the tournament due to the Duke's high-pressure announcement." The maids animatedly chatted about embroidery and confessions, adding to the bustling and radiant spring atmosphere. Time flew by, and soon it was mid-April. Finally, the day of the great martial arts tournament had arrived. Anastasia was being fed and receiving sweet coaxing from the maid. A minor incident occurred when some food was spilled, making the bespectacled maid visibly panic. She frantically scolded her colleague, afraid of ruining the young lady's important dress on this special day. The brilliant yellow dress was finally revealed, causing everyone to gasp in praise at Anastasia's irresistible cuteness. The maids were still trembling for fear of being fired, while the main character felt they were blowing things way out of proportion. Seeing them worried, the little girl waved her hand to calm them down, making them wonder if she was trying to say she was fine. It turned out all the commotion just now was because her upcoming companion was about to appear. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, signaling that the person had arrived. Mikhail walked in, while Anastasia silently lamented her bad luck for always getting the worst option. Having not seen each other for a month, the blonde boy smiled and greeted the little baby in a very friendly manner. Mikhail announced he would be her escort today, receiving an exasperated sigh from Anastasia in return. The boy even bragged that he had practiced carrying babies a lot while staying at the Grand Duke's mansion. With an elegant demeanor, Mikhail knelt down and asked for permission to serve as the young lady's escort. The loudspeaker announced, calling all contestants to gather for the tournament to begin. The prize for the winner was not only money but also another highly honorable title. The crowd below cheered passionately, and the atmosphere started to heat up. The majestic knights carrying flags marched in, while the madam watched from the stands. The most honorable reward was receiving flowers from the hands of the two young ladies of the Ender Blanc family. Mikhail carried Anastasia in, but the boy still wasn't very skilled at it, making the little girl feel extremely uncomfortable. The regular soldiers below were thrilled, brimming with determination to win so they could receive flowers from the two little girls. The madam suggested the two children should say a few words of encouragement to the waiting knights. Laurentia eagerly cheered with all her might, and Damien also expressed his confidence in his brother's victory. When it was her turn, Anastasia thought to herself, Did everyone really expect a speech from a 10-month-old baby? Mikhail leaned in and whispered that he would act as her interpreter, but this only made Anastasia more annoyed. Under the expectant, high-pressure gaze of the soldiers, the little girl realized she had no choice but to cooperate. Anastasia babbled a few sounds, and Mikhail immediately declared clearly that the young lady wanted everyone to win, making the crowd roar like thunder. The little girl could only sigh honestly at the charade that had just taken place. Unexpectedly, Mikhail turned around and asked if she had any words specifically for him. Anastasia was stunned to learn that this little kid would also actually be participating in the tournament. The little girl was extremely worried thinking about a 6-year-old child having to face off against those big, burly knights. Mikhail whined, demanding the little girl cheer for him so he would have the strength to win. Anastasia grabbed the boy's shirt tightly and tried her best to utter a reminder to be safe in her baby voice. The blonde boy was surprised to see that she cared more about his safety than him winning. Mikhail gently placed the little girl down on the seat to get ready for his match. He flashed a bright smile, promising to try his best to leave a strong impression on the baby. Before leaving, Mikhail didn't forget to remind her he wouldn't get hurt and demanded Anastasia praise him if he won. Anastasia decided to ignore his excessive confidence, leaving Mikhail with nothing to do but laugh it off. The first round officially began. The little girl scanned the area looking for her father. Surprisingly, she heard her father's voice coming right from the arena floor below. A hand waved enthusiastically amidst the crowd. Duke Enderblanc appeared majestically and declared that he himself would be the one receiving flowers from his daughters. Anastasia was deeply shocked to see her father, a grown adult, competing in a tournament meant for children and subordinates. This childish father still casually waved his hand, asking his children if they thought he looked cool. The madam and Damien were left speechless. Damien even commented that their father always turned into a silly clown whenever it involved their family. Conversely, Laurentia cheered enthusiastically, praising their father as the best, which made him ecstatic. The Duke blew kisses everywhere and told his children to just wait and watch his performance. Anastasia found it much more comfortable being held in Damien's arms and wondered how this father, who always goofed off, would act when holding a sword. The blue flag fluttered, signaling the official start of the Duke's match. He politely suggested to his opponent that they both do their best. As soon as he raised his sword, Anastasia felt an entirely different aura, powerful and completely overwhelming coming from her father. His opponent visibly trembled, not daring to approach due to the immense pressure. The sounds of clashing weapons echoed continuously and dramatically. Even while fighting, the Duke didn't forget to remind his opponent to focus on openings and maintain balance. Anastasia wondered if her father was competing or taking the opportunity to give his subordinate extra lessons, as the skill gap was just too vast. The match ended swiftly with an absolute victory belonging to the head of the family. Right after winning, he went back to looking giddy and asked his children if he was cool, completely ruining the mood for Anastasia. When it was Mikhail's turn, the boy faced a knight 10 years older than him and won quickly with a critical strike right as the flag dropped. Anastasia secretly judged that this kid possessed incredibly formidable combat instincts. Ironically, Mikhail's opponent in the second round was none other than the little girl's father. The two charged at each other with razor-sharp sword strikes, the clashing sounds ringing out sharply. The Duke still maintained a relaxed expression, as if he were taking a stroll. Laurentia and everyone cheered for her father, and Anastasia also babbled a few times in support. The little girl realized Mikhail knew full well he couldn't win, yet he was still risking everything to find a way to defeat her father. Although his limbs trembled, the eyes of the 6-year-old boy still burned with a thirst for victory and natural talent. Anastasia believed that in 10 years Mikhail would be on par with her father, and in 20 years he would be the strongest swordsman on the continent. The little girl suddenly felt sad, knowing she wouldn't live long enough to witness that glory. Memories flooded back. Anastasia recalled past lives where she had trained all sorts of people who wanted to become stronger. But she had never seen them succeed because they usually died young, or those ungrateful wretches ended up betraying her. 8 out of 10 students turned their backs on her. Some died young, while others simply couldn't improve. Having lived so many lives, the little girl felt that old habits really die hard. Watching the two of them fight, she subconsciously evaluated their strengths and weaknesses like a true mentor. After thousands of years, Anastasia suddenly wondered if she still had the desire to leave anything behind for this world. Damien unexpectedly asked if she thought he was cooler than Mikhail, forcing Anastasia to frantically coax her brother. The little girl thought to herself, why did her brother always like asking such obvious things? Seeing Damien happy, Anastasia's heart suddenly beat faster, and a strangely familiar sense of attachment rose again. In this life, she only wanted to live peacefully with her family, and that was enough for her. However, the image of the mysterious child in her dream still haunted her, making her mind restless. Anastasia was determined to find out the true identity of that suspicious child. The sound of wooden swords dropping to the floor signaled the end of the match. Mikhail bowed his head, accepting defeat against the Duke's overwhelming power. Despite losing, the boy had managed to land 2 critical hits, making even the little girl's father speak up to praise his remarkable progress. As everyone expected, the Duke was the champion of the tournament this time. The 2 little young ladies and their brother stepped onto the stage to present flowers to the winner. As soon as he saw his children, the normally imposing father transformed into a true child-obsessed dad. Anastasia handed the bouquet to her father, much to his sheer delight. The Duke was choked with emotion by the precious spiritual gift from his youngest daughter. He hugged his children tightly, showing off his achievements, while Anastasia secretly thought to herself she was no longer a child. Mikhail stood nearby, chuckling silently, wondering how long this baby would keep up her act. The bustling martial arts tournament finally drew to a close after a few affectionate inquiries from the madam. Returning to her room, Anastasia lay heavily on her bed, completely exhausted after a long day of pretending to be a good child. The little girl stretched her limbs and yawned, wanting nothing more than a deep sleep. However, the sudden appearance of Mikhail quickly pulled her back to reality. The blonde boy walked in with an incredibly serious face, causing Anastasia to grow cautious. He stared intently at the little girl, leaving her wondering what he was plotting again this time. "You're not a normal baby, are you?" Mikhail's question struck like a bolt of lightning. Anastasia's heart skipped a beat. She panicked, thinking her secret had been discovered. She tried to stay calm and continued pretending to be innocent, babbling as if she didn't understand what he was saying. But Mikhail didn't fall for it. He pointed out all the unusual signs he had observed. From the way she controlled her emotions to her intelligent gaze that didn't belong to an infant, everything made him suspicious. Anastasia swallowed hard, cursing herself for being so careless in front of this sharp-minded boy. She had to admit that Mikhail's perception was far beyond that of a normal 6-year-old child. Realizing there was no point in hiding anymore, Anastasia decided to drop the act. The little girl sat up straight, her gaze no longer innocent, but filled with the profound depth of a soul that had lived 100 lives. "So what if I am?" she answered in a clear, cold voice, no longer using her baby tone. Mikhail was surprised, but quickly regained his composure. He smiled slightly, as if satisfied to have his suspicions confirmed. He sat down next to her, not showing any fear or alienation towards this strange phenomenon. On the contrary, the boy expressed a strong interest and wanted to know more about the little girl's true identity. Anastasia coldly warned him that knowing too much wouldn't do him any good. But Mikhail stubbornly insisted that he wouldn't reveal the secret to anyone, not even Damien. He promised to keep it a secret and offered an alliance between the two. Anastasia sneered. She didn't need any alliances, especially not with a 6-year-old boy. However, Mikhail proved his value by stating he could help her cover her tracks and deal with any troubles. He knew the little girl needed someone to help her act freely without arousing suspicion from her family. Anastasia pondered for a moment. It was true that she was facing many difficulties doing things with an infant's body. Having someone covering for her would make her plans go much smoother. The little girl looked deeply into Mikhail's eyes, trying to see if she could trust him. His eyes were clear, determined, and contained no malice. Finally, Anastasia nodded in agreement but didn't forget to issue a stern warning. She threatened that if he dared to betray her, she would make him regret being born. Mikhail just smiled confidently and accepted the challenge without any hesitation. From that day on, a secret agreement was formed between the 2 extraordinarily intelligent children. They coordinated flawlessly. Mikhail helped Anastasia distract the maids whenever she needed to be alone. He also served as a reliable courier, helping her gather information from the outside without drawing attention. In return, Anastasia sometimes provided Mikhail with hints about swordsmanship, which helped him progress remarkably. Damien noticed the 2 of them getting closer but just assumed they were getting along better. Time quietly passed, and Anastasia's first birthday was rapidly approaching. The mansion was bustling with preparations for the grandest birthday banquet of the year. The Duke wanted to make sure his precious daughter's first birthday party was the most spectacular event in the empire. Nobles from all over were invited, and the guest list was incredibly long. Anastasia felt exhausted just thinking about having to face that crowd of nobles. She knew perfectly well that these banquets were just an opportunity for adults to network and show off their power. But as the main character, she couldn't escape this tiring obligation. Mikhail saw her sighing and teased her, asking if she was nervous about the upcoming party. Anastasia rolled her eyes and replied that she just found it extremely annoying and a waste of time. She would rather spend that time practicing magic or resting than listening to fake compliments. Mikhail smiled and promised to stay by her side during the party to help her handle any troublesome guests. The little girl scoffed, but deep down she felt a bit more reassured knowing she had an ally. Finally, the day of the birthday banquet arrived. The mansion was decorated splendidly, glowing with lights, resembling a fairy tale palace. Carriages of the nobles arrived one after another, creating an incredibly bustling and lively scene. Anastasia was dressed in a stunningly beautiful gown, looking like a real little princess. When the Duke carried her into the banquet hall, all eyes focused on the little girl. Whispers of admiration and praise echoed continuously, leaving Anastasia feeling overwhelmed. Just as she expected, the nobles flocked over to offer their congratulations and flatter the Duke. The little girl had to maintain an innocent, adorable smile, even though her facial muscles were starting to cramp up. Mikhail stood nearby, occasionally helping to block some overly enthusiastic guests, easing the pressure on Anastasia. Suddenly, the crowd parted, making way for a distinguished guest. A man with a regal aura stepped forward, accompanied by a cold, imposing presence. It was the Crown Prince of the Empire. The Duke and everyone respectfully bowed to the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince approached, his gaze falling upon the little girl in the Duke's arms. He smiled faintly, offering his congratulations and handing over a very precious gift. Anastasia looked at the Crown Prince and suddenly felt a very familiar and dangerous aura emanating from him. It was the same aura she had sensed from the kidnapper before. The little girl's heart pounded fiercely. She realized the kidnapping was not simply a scheme for ransom. There was a much darker and more sinister plot hidden behind it, and the Crown Prince might be related. Anastasia gripped her father's shirt tightly, trying to conceal her anxiety and fear. Mikhail noticed the abnormality in the little girl and stepped closer, looking at the Crown Prince with wary eyes. The Crown Prince didn't seem to notice the two children's reactions and casually chatted with the Duke. After the Crown Prince left, Anastasia whispered to Mikhail, asking him to investigate his background. The boy nodded solemnly, realizing that things were much more complicated than they thought. The birthday banquet continued, but Anastasia's mind was no longer focused on the festivities. Her determination left Chaco unable to refuse. Chaco obeyed and promised to do his best for his demon queen master. According to the news Chaco brought back, this world consisted of one empire and two kingdoms, with the empire being a place of particular concern. This was a place where only divine power and magic existed, but no inner strength. The Pasan kingdom, where her family lived, recognized both types of power, which was why a magic tower was located near the ducal estate. Anastasia suspected there was a bigger secret hidden behind the empire's constant attempts to expand its influence across the continent. While being fed, the little girl suddenly felt a bad premonition about the information she had just received. Chaco sadly apologized because, despite trying his best, he still hadn't found any clues about the dream intruder. She wanted to start searching in the empire immediately, but her current child's body only allowed her to handle issues within the kingdom. Realizing that the person hadn't attacked again and that her mother also advised against rushing, Anastasia decided to proceed with everything carefully. The little girl tried her best to learn to walk, climb, and pronounce words to grow up quickly, but her mother had an entirely different perspective. Her mother smiled gently and wondered why her youngest child always wanted to grow up in such a hurry. She only wished for Anastasia to always be healthy and remain a cute baby in her arms for a very long time. Her mother's affection eased her worries somewhat, even though Anastasia felt her mother seemed to see right through all her thoughts. Her spirit dog marveled that he had never seen his master this relaxed and asserted that he was still her most capable assistant. Anastasia burst out laughing at the adorable puppy, making the maid think she had fed her so skillfully that the young lady was this happy. The little girl felt there was no need to explain the truth behind her smile to the maid. Because her spirit dog was visible only to her, even the mages couldn't detect its presence as it flew around everywhere. The great thing was that she could keep the dog by her side, but the only annoyance was having to listen to its endless chattering. Mikhail ran into the little girl in the garden and curiously asked if she had just gotten a new puppy. Anastasia jumped in shock, not understanding why he could see such strange things. She hastily ordered the dog to pretend to be a doll immediately. The little girl feigned innocence to distract him, secretly wondering why this kid could notice something that even mages had given up on. Mikhail stared intently at the dog and wondered if it was truly a doll. Despite disliking him, the little girl had to intervene so Mikhail wouldn't end up looking like a fool petting thin air in front of others. Mikhail asked if the item was dirty, while Anastasia could only make ooh sounds in protest. The boy found it very clean and adorable, reiterating that Anastasia seemed to only like these things, the dolls Damien gave her. Mikhail pressed on, asking if the little girl also hated this doll, making her turn pale from the pressure of the demon queen. Out of the blue, he abruptly changed the subject and asked what the little girl thought about yellow dresses. Mikhail smiled brightly, confessing he liked rubies because they reminded him of Anastasia's brilliant red eyes. Anastasia stood silently facing Mikhail amidst the lush green garden. The little girl felt answering his questions was incredibly annoying and tedious. Seeing this, she decided to turn her back and walk away, but Mikhail refused to give up and chased after her. The boy kept blabbering on about fireworks and chick dolls, making her sigh in exasperation at his talkativeness. Anastasia glanced at her spirit dog and began to doubt the information it had gathered. She couldn't believe the person chattering nonstop in front of her was Lord Mikhail, who was famous for being sullen and a man of few words. Mikhail smiled radiantly and excitedly asked what the little girl thought about sparkling gem mines. Anastasia was still puzzled and felt there was definitely something wrong with her dog's intel. The little girl was completely shocked by a talkative Mikhail, far different from the rumors about his coldness. In reality, Mikhail had claimed he knew how to walk since he was 6 months old, but then didn't utter a single word for over a year. The Grand Duke's entire family had been so worried they hired all sorts of renowned priests and doctors to examine him. Fortunately, after that long period of silence, the boy finally spoke his first words. Mikhail suddenly turned to announce to his parents that from now on he could speak. That long-winded and unexpected sentence sent the whole household into a chaotic state of shock. Since then, he became famous everywhere as an extremely quiet boy who only opened his mouth when he felt it was truly necessary. Especially after his parents passed away 2 years ago, Mikhail became even more silent and withdrawn than ever before. Anastasia guessed the Grand Duke had sent him here to provide a better environment for his development. He wanted him to grow up normally among kind adults and peers. The little girl wondered why there was always such an inexplicable awkwardness between Mikhail and her sister Laurentia. With an extroverted and sociable personality like Laurentia's, the two should have become good friends quickly. She wondered if her sister was feeling shy simply because he was inherently a person of few words. Her spirit dog whined helplessly, unable to dig up any more detailed information on the matter. Even so, Anastasia noticed that his silence and coldness completely vanished whenever Mikhail was near her. She truly couldn't understand why he became so talkative and enthusiastic when facing her. Mikhail called her a little baby with eyes full of tenderness and care. He stared at her, earnestly hoping to see her smile, and hoped she would praise him for being so good at helping pick out a birthday gift. In the distance, Laurentia stood quietly watching the two with a face full of worry and sadness. Time passed quietly, along with hidden emotions and anxieties piling up. And then, the moment everyone had been looking forward to so much finally arrived. On the morning of July 3rd, Anastasia woke up in her warm crib feeling quite calm. The little girl stared blankly with a displeased look, having never liked receiving gifts meant for exchange or obligation. Mikhail squatted down, offering his help because he knew her birthday was fast approaching. Anastasia suddenly paused, realizing she was about to turn 1 year old before she even knew it. So it had been exactly a year since she reincarnated as the youngest child in this strange yet loving family. Thinking about the past, the little girl felt a bit melancholic because she always assumed her life would end at age 20 like a curse. A maid came running from afar to announce it was snack time and invited the two little masters to go along. She was surprised to see that Laurentia wasn't there with Anastasia and Mikhail. It was strange because the maid had earlier asked Laurentia herself to go call the two of them in for the meal. Memories flashed back of Laurentia, happily accepting the mission to find her little sister. The older sister ran off eagerly, thinking of a cozy little tea party for the two sisters, Sasha and Lala. But Laurentia abruptly stopped when she witnessed the scene before her through the leaves. Seeing Mikhail laughing and joking happily next to Anastasia, Laurentia suddenly felt an indescribable sense of disappointment welling up inside. She remembered the first day she took the initiative to introduce herself, but was coldly ignored by Mikhail. He had flat out rejected her introduction to go study, leaving her standing all alone and abandoned. Anastasia reminisced about last summer when she began her 100th life in despair and fear. But now she felt a slight flutter of anticipation knowing today was her birthday. She couldn't even remember the last time she had genuinely celebrated a birthday. In the past, whenever her birthday came around, it was only a grim reminder of her short remaining life. Yet in this life, things were so different it left even someone as experienced as her astonished. Instead of heavy emotions, she felt a simple, serene joy kindling in her heart. The bustling maids brought out countless glamorous dresses, leaving the little girl frozen in awe. Her mother gently explained that this was an incredibly important ceremony to predict the little girl's future. Anastasia suddenly remembered how she had once chosen the thread symbolizing a long life, yet still ended up dying before the age of 20. Her mother told her the dress she chose today would determine the life partner or soulmate who would stick with her for a lifetime. She recounted how in the past she had chosen a pink dress with a jade hairpin, which led to her meeting and falling in love with her father. The little girl was stunned when her mother asserted that her father was the destiny arranged for her ever since that moment. She affectionately patted her daughter's head and expressed her absolute love and trust for her husband. Her mother hoped Anastasia would also choose a dress that would bring her a loyal and reliable companion. If it were her past lives, the little girl would definitely never believe in these unrealistic theories of destiny. But because the person saying it was her mother, a tiny sliver of hope began to kindle in her heart. Even though she knew having high expectations was dangerous, she decided to reach out her tiny hands to make a choice. Her mother let out a soft gasp of surprise upon seeing her daughter had officially made her decision. Anastasia stared in awe at the dress she had just picked because it looked more radiant and sparkling than anything she had ever seen. Every fiber seemed to radiate all sorts of colors, from ruby to diamond, whenever light shined on it. The little girl smiled, realizing the love and meticulous care her mother had put into this outfit. The gentle, warm scent from her mother made her feel incredibly happy and at peace. All the wishes for a hope she had longed for over the past 99 lives seemed to have been realized by her mother today. Time flew by, and exactly a year had passed since Anastasia officially became a member of this estate. Despite being mentally prepared, she still couldn't help but be shocked by the extreme extravagance of the party her family had organized. The entire estate was decorated magnificently with lights and brilliant ribbons everywhere. The little girl stood speechless when she saw a giant crystal statue that looked exactly like her shining in the middle of the hall. Indeed, this family always found a way to do things far beyond the little girl's expectations. Mikhail came over to greet her, and she realized the ruby on the statue was the very gift he had given her earlier. Anastasia immediately turned her head away, not wanting to pay any more attention to this talkative boy. A giant 5-tier cake appeared, decorated with the little girl's signature ruby-red eyes right on top. The entire estate was filled with beautiful things, making Anastasia feel like everything was a sweet dream. Her father approached and called his darling daughter to follow him so the official ceremony could begin. The whole family gathered around, hugging the little girl and giving her the most sincere birthday wishes. The maids and the guard squad cheered joyfully in unison, expressing their honor in serving the little young lady. A maid came up and asked if Anastasia had picked this beautiful dress all by herself. She believed the young lady would surely find wonderful companions just like the way she had chosen this dress. Looking at the radiant faces around her, the little girl realized they were all genuinely celebrating for her. Even though she guessed they had just received a generous bonus from her father, it still warmed her heart immensely. The little girl realized that the kind people around her held truly sincere affection for her family. Anastasia babbled a thank you, melting the hearts of everyone present with her adorableness. The party was filled with fresh fruits, music from famous musicians, and countless gifts from the nobility. Despite being the center of attention, the little girl started to feel tired and just wanted to return to her room to rest immediately. Right at that moment, her father gently called his youngest daughter's name and knelt formally in front of her. He tenderly reached out his hand and invited Anastasia to share the first dance of her birthday party. The little girl nodded in agreement, even though she secretly thought dancing with a 1-year-old was quite bizarre. The father and daughter began spinning across the vast hall with everyone watching. The musicians also nodded in greeting and began playing melodious tunes to join in. Her father bent down very low to hold her hands and dance properly according to his daughter's height. Anastasia was deeply moved to realize her father had humbled himself to accompany her every step. He gently lifted the little girl high, spinning her in the air to the music. Her father endlessly praised her as an excellent dancer, even though she knew she was just being carried around by him. Laurentia and Damien were not to be outdone, loudly demanding to dance with their little sister. Her mother playfully pouted because her husband was only hugging their child and neglecting her, prompting her father to frantically turn and take her hand. The small, warm hands of the entire family clasped tightly together in pure bliss. Anastasia smiled happily as she spun to the music with her siblings, fully enjoying everyone's love. The dance melody from last year echoed, stirring up a lively atmosphere. Laurentia enthusiastically skipped around, making Anastasia marvel at her sister's boundless energy, while Damien hurriedly called after his sister to take it easy. Just when she was tired and wanted to rest, Mikhail suddenly appeared and politely invited Anastasia for a dance. The little girl was dumbfounded because she had completely forgotten about this friend's presence. Mikhail lifted the little girl up and the two spun together to the soothing music. The boy looked at her with eyes full of joy and tenderness. In the middle of the banquet hall, her parents and siblings were also lost in joyful dances. This melody made Anastasia nostalgic for the days when she was truly a newborn infant. Mikhail looked deeply into Anastasia's eyes and curiously asked if the little girl was smiling at him. The little girl immediately put on a cold face and denied it outright, confusing Mikhail because he had clearly seen that smile. The boy told himself he would have to practice even harder to truly win his little sister over. Mikhail asserted that he would definitely become a great dancer to make the little girl show her most genuine smile. Anastasia secretly judged Mikhail to be an incredibly persistent child who never knew when to quit. Even though she found that determination a bit stubborn, she realized she didn't hate it at all. The little girl relaxed and comfortably agreed to dance with Mikhail, just as she had with her own family members. The official party came to a close in the afternoon so the servants could have private time to rest until late at night. The whole family gathered together. Damien excitedly boasted that his sister Sasha could now jump, while her mother expressed deep regret at not having seen it in time. Laurentia proudly claimed that because she was the older sister, she got to witness everything, and Sasha really liked holding her siblings' hands whenever she practiced walking. Anastasia babbled in agreement, filling the room with warm laughter. Thinking about how fast the past year had gone by, Anastasia felt scared because she was gradually becoming too immersed in and accustomed to this overly leisurely life. Seeing her children were exhausted, her mother gently urged everyone to hurry to bed. Despite having many lingering worries, the little girl decided she would cherish and enjoy every happy moment with this family. Her father gently gathered his daughter in his arms and promised to help her have a truly good sleep. Under her father's affectionate pats, Anastasia drifted off and forgot to put up the mental barrier as she had initially planned. In her drowsy state, the little girl sensed something wrong as the clanking of chains echoed in the dark space. Anastasia realized her premonition about something bad had officially come true. A small figure with their head fully covered suddenly appeared and offered a mysterious greeting. The moment she saw that person, Anastasia immediately recognized the hateful name that had haunted her before.